The countdown to the start of the Sixers season is right around the corner. However, eyes remain on the trade deadline as Daryl Morey attempts to put his full fingerprints on the Sixers team and build out the desired championship contender. Well, a new name has entered the conversation as Corey Kispert has been circled as a player that multiple teams are eyeing as a potential trade chip as he sits on an underperforming Washington Wizards team without much hope, and the Sixers may be the type of team to pounce. I'm going to break down the latest report that has the Sixers tied to him, as well as talk about what a potential trade could look like at this point. I do want to note that just about every move that the Sixers are going to likely be making as the deadline will be occurring after December 15th, as that is when KJ Martin's contract is eligible to be extension. And while I like KJ and he's been a guy that I think has played pretty well in preseason thus far, he is more or less a human trade chip, or a trade exception, I guess is a proper word to use it. So I do expect him to be involved in just about all negotiations at this point. But I want to dive into what Corey Kispert could bring to this Sixers team, talk a little bit about who he is as a player. So let's start off with the headlines here, and the article titled that 76ers predicted to trade for $16 million sharpshooter to solidify bench. And to dive a little deeper into what is written, it says a cheaper option pitched by fan-sided Alexandros Tascos is Washington Wizards forward Corey Kispert. Quote, Kispert is not a great fit for the Wizards timeline, and the DC franchise might opt to capitalize on his value by requesting some extra picks to trade his expiring contract. Kispert might be a risky option considering that the 76ers are going to be required to pay him next summer, but the franchise is on course to compete for an NBA title, and Morey might opt for another high-risk, high-return decision. The 25-year-old averaged 13.4 points on 38.3% shooting from three-point field goal range last season. Kispert started in just 22 games last year, proving himself as a spark plug off the bench for Washington. It continues on to say that, quote, Kispert can easily become a leading figure for Philadelphia's veteran bench mob and keep the offense afloat until the starters make their way back to lineup, Tascos wrote. He's one of the most underrated cutters in the league, and he might add an extra dimension to the Sixers offense. Moreover, his fit with the rest of the personnel is excellent, so Philadelphia will definitely need his skill set in the postseason. If the $16 million sharpshooter could drain a few outside shots a game for Philadelphia, it could make a major difference in games coming down to the buzzer. And to add a little bit more context here, this is a common name that is circulating. This is Fred Katz here, who does a lot of work covering the Knicks, and he tweeted that one person I'm keeping an eye on in October, Corey Kispert. He's eligible for an extension, is on a struggling team, and isn't just a shooter. He's become one of the NBA's smartest cutters. Dude can play a role on a winning team. Went for 20 off the bench tonight. There's something there. And I do agree with that overall assessment that I do think Kispert falls in the category of a good player being wasted away on a bad team. I would like to see him freed to a new location. He's been a player that I've been fond of dating back to his time at Gonzaga in college there. And I do think the Sixers could absolutely benefit from his skill set. Now, to dive a little deeper into that, do want to pull up some highlights for him here, and you can see the catch and shoot from the corner. He is basically known as a shooter, but there is more to his game than just that. The cutting has been pointed out pretty heavily. I do think that's something that he stands out just about every time I watch him. He's also very capable of taking guys off the dribble, and he's not a zero as a defender. No, he's not going to be a stopper or a guy that you're putting on opponents' best players. But he does stand 6'7", has a little bit more size to him than I think is really given common knowledge there. And it is his shooting that ultimately, at the end of the day, does make him belong on the court. When looking at kind of these stats as a whole, that he has improved a little bit each year, went from 8.2 points per game as a rookie to 11.1 in his second year and 13.4 points per game last season. Looking at the three-point percentage, which again is how I expect him to shine on the Sixers team and really in the NBA as a whole, shot 35% as a rookie on 4.2 attempts per game, 42.4% last year on 5.2 three-point attempts, which is a great margin there. Did show a little bit of regression last year, increased his volume to 6 three-point attempts per game, but just connected at a 38.3% range. For what it's worth, that's still very good. That's not something that I'm looking down upon, but it is like that 42.4% number. We're talking about some elite figures for this guy. Now, when thinking about how he can be utilized on this Sixers team, I do see a lot of movement off ball. That I still think there is an argument to be made that they are lacking a movement shooter, sort of the JJ Redick type role that I don't think has been properly filled. There have been guys that have come and go. There was Isaiah Joe for a minute. Seth Curry obviously had some shine playing with some two-man game with Joel Embiid, but there has not been a guy that is just a absolute dead-eye three-point shooter that can come off screens, run down pin downs, and just rip twine regularly there. I think Corey Kispert can be that type of guy. And I do think that he does fit into the context of this Sixers team. So that is a guy that I absolutely have circled. Again, I do think it would have something to do with KJ Martin here. But looking at this team as a whole, I think probably the correct kind of breakdown of that is the Kispert move would be motivated if Eric Gordon does not have much left in the tank. When looking at the depth chart as a whole here, the starters pretty set in stone for what this team will be. That it is Tyrese Maxey, Kelly Oubre, Paul George, Caleb Martin, Joel Embiid. Although I will note that Caleb Martin, while being fully healthy and playing in the game, did not start in last night's preseason game. It was Eric Gordon that was elevated to the starting lineup along with Paul George, and there was no Joel Embiid in that matchup. Andre Drummond filling the role as well. So maybe not for sure that Caleb Martin will be a starter, but I do think he should be. I'm very excited for what he brings to this team, and honestly, thought he looked very good last night, even while coming off the bench. But looking beyond that, I do think Eric Gordon would be the role that Kispert would be kicking ahead of and moving up into that pecking order there. I do think there is more life in Kispert's legs at this point. That I still think Gordon has something in the tank, but I think the expectations for Gordon should be pretty tame. That he's going to be a guy that knocks down three-point shots, is willing to shoot from range, which is appealing, although Kispert holds that qualification as well. And he is a guy that there is not much there defensively. That Kispert, while he's not perfect, he is a guy that's got a little more scrap to him. He is 6'7". I do appreciate the extra size. To Gordon's defense, he is very strong, and that's something that I think does aid him in a lot of situations, but he's still only 6'2", a guy that's much more of a guard than a wing, which I think is a little bit disappointing when kind of building out the picture of the Sixers team. But ultimately, there's a lot to like about Kispert's ability here. So we'll see if this is a name that continues. It would not entirely shock me if there's another team that jumps out of the woodwork and is a little bit more motivated to get that deal done before that December 15th margin or timeline with KJ Martin that the Sixers will likely be waiting on here. What I think the most important to note about this is there's been so much talk about this offseason, and Daryl Morey rightly has gotten praise for it. That we've talked about the Paul George signing together. Other additions, Gershon Yabusele will make an impact on this team. Caleb Martin, an awesome addition to the Sixers team. Andre Drummond will be incredibly relevant to the team's success this year. But what's most important is Daryl Morey did not close a ton of doors here. There's still draft picks to work with. There's still tradable contracts on this roster that they are not done making this all-in push. That is why the Paul George signing was so significant, is this was not something that the Sixers were able to just, pour everything in and then get him. They had to do the work in the past by eating Tobias Harris's contract, not trading him last year, making that number come off the books, keeping all that cap space open, and then Paul George was able to walk right into that max slot here. But the other benefit of that, by him just signing in free agency, is you do not have to dig into other assets here. You did not have to trade young players, did not have to give away all your draft picks. The point being, there is still some moves that could be made by Daryl Morey if he decides that that is the best thing for this Sixers franchise. I very much expect Corey Kispert to be a name mentioned as the trade deadline gets closer. I do want to see this Sixers team in full game action. We've had a couple looks at him in the preseason so far, but need to see him in some high leverage situations with Joel Embiid on the floor, who we've yet to see. Seems like we're getting positive news regarding the status of Paul George, but still waiting on an official update there. Nick Nurse did speak to the media a little bit more today. I did drop a video on it earlier speaking on what we knew. Didn't really add much when speaking to the media. That it seems like imaging is fine, but there has not been an official announcement on the diagnosis, so something to keep our eye on there as well. But ultimately, there will be some live basketball to talk about soon. The countdown to the Sixers season starting is nearly here, and I'll be here from start to finish with you guys talking about everything on this channel. So let me know in the comments your thoughts on Corey Kispert. Is that a name that you think the Sixers team should be putting on the inside track and eyeing as the deadline approaches? Is this a guy who could elevate this team in the playoffs? I do lean toward yes, and he is a guy pretty high on my list of targets for the Sixers team, but do want to see what this team looks like on the floor before we start fully diving into the trade talks here. But let me know if you guys are on the same page as me in the comments. As always, appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning into this video here. Make sure you smash that subscribe button and drop a like on this video if you have not already. I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.